Hello and welcome back to my channel. I hope you've been having a good week so far. If not, maybe this video is a welcome break to you. But today we are going to go through all of the books that I read in June, and this month it was only 6. I still think that's a load of books, but it's not as much as I've been reading these past months, but that is totally fine. Fluctuation is normal. So we're just gonna get right into it. I'm gonna go through these books in no particular order, they're just over here, and the first one on the stack is actually Where the Dead Sit Talking, which was my DNF, so I'm not counting this toward the 6 books that I actually read. I got through about 2/3 of this book, and then I actually just finally decided to DNF it. I did not click with this book at all. This book is about his Sequoia. He does not know his father, and his mother ends up in prison, and so he becomes part of the foster system and moves in with his new foster parents. At his foster parents' house, there are already 2 other foster children. One of those other children is also Native American, as he is, and they develop this bond. I don't know. I just didn't click with the story. It was not. I didn't know where this was going. It just didn't catch me. There was no real plot except for him kind of like stalking the other foster child. And what I also don't like in stories is when, I just hate it when there are like weird sexual fantasies that are just not okay or appropriate. I don't know. I just find that creepy. I don't want to know that that exists. And I guess for a teenage boy that might make sense because hormones are raging at that time, but I could not click with this, so I DNF'd it. That's my opinion on this, but I'm sure there are lots of other people that will enjoy this book. Otherwise, it would not have been a National Book Award finalist. So that's just me. The next book on my pile here is The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. This was actually a really fun read. So The War of the Worlds was written by H.G. Wells at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. So this was originally published in like 1890 something, and it was later turned into a radio show, and people actually thought everything was happening. And this is an alien invasion. There's no other way to put it. So aliens from Mars came down to Earth in their little pods and try to destroy humanity. That's basically the plot line in this book. I just really enjoyed this because every once in a while it's kind of fun to see like adventure stories unfold because they're so much slower. Adventure stories or movies, books, whatever it is in our time are so fast paced, and this book was so slow paced, but I think for its time it was really fast paced because, I mean, if the horse is the fastest way to get somewhere, then of course this was a fast paced book. But it was just really fun to read that, and what I also thought was amazing was to see the science in the book, because now we actually know a lot more about Mars and its potential, and maybe there could have been life there one day. So that was actually kind of interesting. But what I also thought was interesting was to see like the evolutionary theories in here. So at that time when H.G. Wells was actually writing this book, Darwin's evolutionary theories were still fairly new. And so a lot of people got swept up into the whole evolutionary theory world, obviously, or we wouldn't have had our wonderful, beautiful 2 world wars. But anyway, it was kind of interesting to see his evolutionary theories or thoughts in this book, because the way it's portrayed in this, it's completely outdated today, of course, but it was probably super inventive in its time. That was just a really interesting thing to see for me as a scientist, I guess. When I was done with this book, I also watched the, I think 2004 or 5 Tom Cruise War of the Worlds adaptation movie, and it was actually really interesting how many ideas were used from the original War of the Worlds. I thought it was kind of cool that they actually kept so close to the storyline, as close as they could, while making this story, of course, a modern story. So, of course, the story itself was kind of different, but a lot of the concepts were the same, and I really liked the idea. I thought they did a really good job with the movie now after reading War of the Worlds. So the next book that I finished this month was The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. I started reading this in May and then finished it beginning of June because it's just a very thick book. It just took a while to read. And this was a reread for me. I read it about 10 years ago, I think, for the first time, and I absolutely loved it then, and I absolutely loved it now. There's nothing else really to say. I sobbed for the last 100 pages of this book, and this book is just so bone-crushingly beautiful and tragic at the same time, and you really just, you feel afterwards, you really just sit there and you're like, oh my god, it was just such a waste. What a waste the Second World War was. Any war, what a waste it just is of human life, of everything that people have to bring. And this is about a family that is not in the war, or at least later on the dad is, but that's something else. It's actually about life outside of the front lines and what it was like in Germany during the Second World War. And it's so sad. I mean, just what people had to go through. I cannot recommend this read enough. This is an absolute 5-star book for me, a favorite of all times. Now, for my viewers that speak German, please read this in German. I tried to figure out what this book was originally published in, if it was English or German. It says everywhere that it was originally published in English and translated simultaneously. However, you can really tell that a German person wrote this book. Part of the book is explaining why certain words were used for this person. But I think if you speak German, I would definitely recommend actually reading this in German. It just makes way more sense. If you haven't read it, pick it up, read it. You will not regret it. The next book that is over here is Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. And I absolutely enjoyed this read. I think I might actually be getting into Greek mythology, which I never thought I ever would get into, but with so many modern retellings and in this mystical, beautiful way, oh god, it's so great. This story is about Ariadne, Princess of Crete, and she is basically a traitor to Crete. Her father has a son that is part Taurus, part human, and he becomes a bit of a monster, and his father uses this monster against the people of Athens. She helps Theseus, a prince of Athens, kill this monster, and then the story unfolds. I'm not going to say any more than that, but there is so much that happens in this book, and I just love the way that in these Greek mythology stories, you just span whole lifetimes. You span so many years of these people, and you can see them develop as characters, and you can see them develop new ideas, become different persons, reflect on what we've read at the very beginning of the book, what it was naive, what was a good decision, and see like their confidence develop. And I loved there was an emphasis here on how women were mistreated or misrepresented in Greek mythology, even that they basically always pay for things that men do. And it was just such a good read. I really enjoyed this, and because the style was just so mystical and mysterious, and it was written well, it was such a fun and enjoyable read. So I recommend this to anyone who is interested in Greek mythology, and if you enjoyed something like The Song of Achilles, then you should definitely pick this up. The next book that I have lying over here is The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abida Ray. I'm going to butcher these names. I am so sorry for it already. It is just me and not knowing how to pronounce it any better. This book is about Aduni, a Nigerian girl who is determined to get her education, and she is, by a series of unfortunate events, sold basically into slavery, into a household with a big madam and a big important guy. Her predecessor mysteriously disappeared. Her predecessor was called Rebecca, and she's mysteriously gone, and she's trying to figure out why Rebecca disappeared so the same thing doesn't happen to her, while still not giving up the hope of actually getting an education. And this book was just amazing. I never would have picked it up without Elias's recommendation, I think it was, and then I saw it and was like, okay, fine, that sounds like a cool book. I cannot recommend it enough. This was a great read. Adoni actually is a great narrator. This book is written from her perspective, and it was just so much fun listening to her voice. She truly has a very distinctive voice and like a distinctive personality that I think I'll always remember, and it touched on so many different topics. Obviously, it touched on how it is difficult for women in Nigeria to get access to education, and how women in some parts of the world are still seen as lesser and not worth having an education, and basically just worth marrying them off. But at the same time, it also worked on all kinds of different issues, like when people are in a system in which they are oppressed, how they themselves can become an oppressor because of that. And I thought that was so excellently done because I don't think we talk about that enough. And this was a topic that I read about in Hood Feminism, about why there can be extremely harsh, like slut-shaming values towards Black women, even in Black communities. And it basically is because the oppression that you feel is funneled towards oppression of others. And that was just done so well. Seriously, I absolutely recommend this book. Especially if you're interested in education, if you're passionate about education like me, this is just an ode to education and how important it is. Another book that I read that I borrowed from a friend, so I don't have a physical copy here, is Oryx and Crake by Margaret Atwood. And Margaret Atwood is one of my favorite authors anyway. I mean, we're just gonna say it outright. I love her books because she's just an excellent writer, and I love how she can just pick a topic and focus on that and reflect that topic through a whole story. So Oryx and Crake is a pandemic story. It is a dystopian novel, and I think I've been reading a bit too many dystopias because some of the things were kind of repetitive in context of other dystopian pandemic novels that I've been reading as of late. But it was still a great story, and it had a perfect balance between like the personal issues of the narrator and the plot that was alongside it. So we have two plot lines. We have the plot line of how the pandemic broke out, and then we have a plot line after the pandemic, after Snowman, the protagonist of this story, and he feels like he's the last person on Earth. And he knew Oryx and Crake before the pandemic. I'm not going to say much more about the plot, but what was interesting was the premise. Before the pandemic, that we had these huge like biotech corporations that were basically trying to change human life. So some of them were trying to work on never aging or never looking like you age, and other people were working on illnesses or how to regrow organs so we can do organ transplants more easily. So they were working on big issues, or I wouldn't say aging is a big issue, but issues that humanity thinks about a lot, and finding like biotechnological solutions for these problems. As a molecular biotechnologist myself, I just think it's very interesting to look at these questions and ask, how far are we willing to go? Because I think humanity 200 years ago couldn't have even imagined all the things that we can do today. Then the question becomes like, how far are we willing to go for certain things? Do we want to grow organs? I mean, we're talking about growing organs in petri dishes, but are we willing to like develop an animal that will grow the organs for us? Is that something that people in 100 years will see as normal? Or will they still think it's an atrocity? So I think those questions are very interesting and debatable. I don't think that we're in reach of any of the corporations or any of the possibilities that were actually in this book, but I still think it's interesting to ask ourselves, how far do we want to go in medical research? Because we're doing pretty well. So the last book I have over here is Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And I really like this book. So I knew the basic plot for this book because I had already seen the show Little Fires Everywhere, and the show does not differ much in plot from the book. But of course I enjoyed the book a lot more because I really like having that look into other people's head. When I tell you the synopsis, it's not going to sound like much, but it is a really interesting story. So basically, a mom and her kid move into a new town, and they move into a town that's like super, everything is regulated, lawns are at a perfect, 2 inches, and everything's super nice. And her daughter becomes friends with a very wealthy family that lives in this place. So much happens. Every single character in this book has a flaw, an issue, a drama that they're dealing with, and it just all ties together wonderfully, and it was just done so well. I haven't read anything with an omniscient narrator either. I feel like a lot of the books that we read, they may not be in the protagonist perspective, and we're just hopping from one perspective to the other, but this narrator was truly omniscient, and that was actually kind of interesting because we would just weave from one person to the next, and I think that was just excellently done. So I'm definitely going to check out Celeste Ng's other book. I think there's another book of hers out there, and I'm definitely going to check that out because the writing was just superb. I got sucked into this world and just in 2 days read the whole thing. So let me know in the comments what you thought of this book, what you think you would have done in certain people's situations. I don't know, I thought it was very interesting. That was it for the books this month. All in all, it was 6 books and 1 DNF, so you know my opinions of all of the books. It was still a great reading month. I just didn't feel like reading a lot of the time because the weather was really good and I just wanted to go outside and explore and do other things, which is just totally fine if I don't try to force myself to read if I don't actually feel like reading. I'm always interested to hear if you have read any of the books that I talked about. If you're planning to read any of them, obviously please mark your spoilers, but I'm just so interested to hear what you thought of these stories. And I don't know, I enjoyed a lot of them, and I think Little Fires Everywhere, I think I'll be rereading it sooner rather than later, because I think there's so many nuances to the different characters and what they were going through and what they were thinking. I think it'll be worth rereading soon. I hope you're having a great day, and I will see you next week. Bye!